Hey everyone, Jeff here with the J Free 906 podcast and continuing on with the Curse of Oak Island series. Now, you remember just a little while back, I shared with you some looks at the Money Pit area and its relation to the Muon data as well as the seismic data. Now, this picture here is one where I overlaid the Muon data onto the Money Pit and trying to get an idea of exactly where they were seeing some of these anomalies that were 150 down to 200 and some feet below ground. This shows you here where the Aladdin's cave is located. And I lined it up on the muon sensors to the south and the west muon sensors. You also see where the C1 borehole is. Now, in this one here, you can actually see where that high density anomaly is. This is roughly the size and its location, which is puts it right down below C1, actually. Now, you remember back in season five, the guys from Panther Technologies came out. This was Jeremy Church and Burton Cosgrove. They had come out and they had done a survey, a seismic survey in the Money Pit area down to Smith's Cove. They set off, gosh, I don't know, was it 20,000 charges to gather this data? And then they went and ran it through their software. Then they came back and they did another run of this data through new software that they had, and they came and presented it to the guys. This was in episode number 10. And I remember them asking, show us where C1 and shaft 12 are in relation to this data. So you can see the C1 and the shaft 12 located. Now, at that time, they were calling shaft 12 the garden shaft. And a little bit later in this video, I'm going to show you where shaft 12 may be actually somewhere else, and this may be shaft 17. But for the purposes of this overlay, I'm going to continue calling the garden shaft a shaft 12. And in this picture, you see down here, this is H8 down here, and of course C1 and the garden shaft or shaft 12 here. Now, right down in here is L15 and L16 that they just showed just a few weeks ago, and they found that open cavity down there that they are calling Aladdin's Cave. So, pretty interesting how that relates. Now, this picture here is a little bit more extensive, showing the seismic data on a broader scale. This little area here is the garden shaft, or what they were calling shaft 12. Right here is C1, and this is H8. This little leg right here would be the tunnel that they're following down by the L15, L16 area. But what is this stuff over here? We still do not know at this point in time, but we're going to take another look at this, and I'm going to overlay this onto the money pit here in just a moment. Okay, I took a picture. This is more of an actual picture of the money pit area where I overlaid the C1 and the garden shaft or shaft 12, as they're calling it, and this anomaly that is right down here, which the tail end of it catches where the L15 and L16 areas were right here. And again, you can see the muon sensors down there as well. Now, C1 we know was in a cavity. Now, what I did in this picture was I overlaid the muon data in there a little bit. So it's really light, but you can kind of see it here. And again, it's interesting how these match up right here in this area right here as well. You see, both of them have this little tip out that comes out here to this point and then back around. Interesting. So, does that mean that that's exactly what there is a tunnel or a shaft or a cavity down there? There is, and we know there is because we've seen them drill to it before. But it's interesting how these two different types of technology, looking at underground cavities, show the same area. Now, here's a look at that extensive data that was provided from the seismic survey. And I tried my best to get this lined up as well as possible. Now you can see in this one here that we do have H8 and C1 both inside of a cavity right here. And again, you have the areas, the L15 and L16 lining up in some sort of a tunnel that they had talked about heading towards the garden shaft. So that's pretty interesting. Now, the baby blob and all of that, not showing up in this particular data. Now, Zane, one of our viewers and a good friend, is taken and put on the grid onto here to kind of get a look at it this way. And this is another interesting look at the extensive data. Here you can see the chapel shafts and the head shaft right down here. Now here's another picture looking at the C1 and shaft 12 and the tunnels that we believe are running underneath the garden shaft and heading out towards Smith's Cove. Now here's a picture that Zane had provided. This is based upon the seismic data from season 5, where I had overlaid it onto the money pit, and he added in some tunnels and the grid so we could get a better look at it with the actual grid on top. C1 being over here, chapel shaft, head and shaft, and a tunnel that we believe is the one that's running through the middle here and over towards Aladdin's cave over here. This would be your L15, L16 areas right over in here. And the tunnel that they thought was running towards the garden shaft, but it looks like it may veer off and head over towards the baby blob. This is the area, of course, in the baby blob, and the blob is where they found the high concentrations of silver and gold in the water. Now, the tunnel running all the way through, and on the other side of the garden shaft is where they were following it on the other side, and that was your DN 24.5 boreholes that were put in up here on the side. This is up where the crane would sit when it's working in the garden shaft. Interesting, you can see over here the Dunfield dig area. This was over here where had done his big 100-foot hole across. And you can see here, we think that he completely missed everything that was of importance in the money pit. Now, remember when I was talking about shaft number 12 and how it had seemed to all of a sudden be moved from one place to another? They were at one point, they were calling shaft 12 the garden shaft. But if you look at some of the records that have been made up over the years, you can see here, and I'll highlight this for you, this right here is shaft 12 on these old data sets. Now, shaft 12, and it says right above it, the cave in pit. So, shaft 12 was over by the cave in pit. And this is why I say that the garden shaft, they are now looking at it, maybe it was shaft number 17, which was built right here. This is shaft 17, done in 1898 at a depth of 90 feet. Now, we know that the garden shaft was about 82 feet. Now, give or take a little bit there. And shaft number 12 said it was only 55 feet. And that's one of the reasons why I'm saying that the cave-in pit could be shaft 12 area, but the garden shaft does not appear to be shaft 12 because of its depth. And it also says 350 feet east of the money pit, which correlates down towards the cave-in pit. Shaft 17, on the other hand, says 45 feet east of number 3, which is actually right here. That makes much more sense to be shaft 17 being the garden shaft. Here's a look at another map that was made. You can see number 3 right here. Okay. And at that time, there was no cave in pit when this one was created. So they do not have a shaft 12. You can also see that the highest number of shafts in this particular map is on shaft number 7 that goes down 30 feet. At this point, there was nothing more than number 7. Number 8 is the excavation of the shore filled with stones and a reservoir. And you can also see the supposed tunnel, which was your flood tunnels. That's number 9. And then the cellar to the Smith's house. Remember, we talked about that in a previous episode about how the Smith house was sitting in the money pit area. Here's another map that we were looking at. And this one shows again shaft number 12 over here at the cave in pit and shaft 17, where we think is the garden shaft right there. Now, one picture we haven't quite put together yet. Remember this one here? This was during that season 9, episode number 10 seismic survey run through the new software. And the guys were presenting this data to the Oak Island team. And they were talking about that 12 by 12 room or box that was underneath the money pit. This one here, we have yet to be able to line it up. Unfortunately, we don't have any particular markers by which to line this up. I think it's very close to C1, and it very well could be in the middle of the money pit area, this 12 by 12 box. But we just simply don't have that data yet. Once we get some information on this, I'll be sure to put this together and send this out to you so you all can take a look at this and get a better idea of where they're estimating this 12 by 12 box or chamber to be in the money pit. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this little look at some of the seismic data and the muon data, and we'll catch you next time right here on the J Free 906 podcast.